Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today, it is Poetry Thursday, so I wanted to talk about some fun poetry that I have encountered. And this poem was something I was going to talk about last week, but I actually took all of last week off from focusing on books and poetry. And this poem is actually something I found a couple weeks ago that really interested me. But yeah, I just wanted to enjoy myself, and indeed I did. So here I am now talking about the poetry, and it is a poem that continues with what I was looking for in the month of December, which is that of snow and cold, and it's in January, so snow and cold still applies. I am referring to Snowfall by Ravi Shankar. For those who don't know, Ravi Shankar is an Indian American poet who has written his memoirs. He's written quite a few books of poetry. He's gotten his work published in various magazines and journals, including McSweeney's, among many others. And he's also served as an editor as well. He's worked at a couple universities, and they've seemed to have fired him based on what I've read, and a lot of that applies to his previous record of incarceration. And I don't know if this is just a history that is being used against him, or if they actually had cause to fire him. It sounds like he had a history with driving while intoxicated, which is unfortunate. But it apparently created a big to-do, and he's also written a lot about mass incarceration in general. So it seems to have influenced him in some regard there. But it unfortunately bears no weight on the current poem that we're going to talk about. I do find his poems interesting because they have an unusual sort of mathematical style to them. Maybe even scientific style in the way he discusses nature and whatnot. Whereas other people are more loving, his poems are more observant, which they seem to be kind of devoid of emotion. Not in a bad way or anything like that, but it's there, but in a different form. And he also writes about love and longing as well, among many other things. And I even I bookmarked a couple of his poems, and I'm going to talk about those in the near future because it was really hard choosing one specific poem to talk about today, because all of his work is really fascinating in some way. So without further ado, let's talk about Snowfall. I will read it, do a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. Snowfall. Particulate as ash, New Year's first snow falls upon peaked roofs, car hoods, underland hills, in imitation of motion that moves the way static cascades down screens when the cable zaps out, persistent and granular with a flicker of legibility that dissipates before it can be interpolated into any succession of imagery. 1 hour stretches 60 minutes into a field of white flurry. Hexagonal lattices of water molecules that accumulate in drifts, too soon strewn with sand, hewn with browning mounds by plow blade, left to turn to slush. And so that was Snowfall. In terms of analysis, very interesting kind of poem worth talking about here. In terms of the narrative of the poem, it seems as though someone is just looking at the snow and describing what they see. But a very important note is how they're describing the snow that you're seeing. We usually, when you think of how the snow is described, you think of Robert Frost. He wrote quite a few poems about that, but it's sort of described lovingly, or in connection with nature and enjoying the beauty of it all. And while I do think there is a beauty here, and the narrator is somewhat in awe, it is a bit more scientific. A bit more strict. This is exactly what I'm seeing. You see that in the first verse where the narrator says, particulate as ash, New Year's first snow falls upon peaked roofs, car hoods, undulant hills, an imitation of motion that moves the way static cascades down screens when the cable zaps out. It's a very interesting way to describe snow falling, kind of like a TV screen. And it's falling on peaked roofs, car hoods, undulant hills. Very straight and to the point. And then you also see this in a later verse where the narrator says, 1 hour stretches 60 minutes into a field of white flurry. Hexagonal lattices of water molecules that accumulate in drifts too soon strewn with sand. And I find that very interesting because who describes snow as hexagonal lattices of water molecules besides scientists? It's a very straightforward way in this poem, which kind of comes off as a little, strict and to the point, which could rob the poem of any emotional value that it might have. But I think it doubles back on itself, and it comes across as a very beautiful perspective of the way of seeing snow. It caught my attention when I was reading, because I was like, wow, I've never really heard snow described that way before outside of a science textbook. So it was pretty fascinating there. But another interesting element of not only this poem, but many other poems that Ravi Shankar writes is the words that he uses. He uses a lot of sound-alikes, a lot of similar sibilants and consonants and other kinds of letters. He weaponizes grammar and the English language to the fullest extent of his ability. And I do think that contributes in some way to the scientific notion of his writing. It feels like it's mathematical and planned out and calculated in ways that you don't really see these days with poetry, since it feels more loose and free. You get particulate as ash, New Year's first snow falls upon peaked roofs, car hoods, undulant hills, an imitation of motion. So you get the imitation of motion that moves the way static cascades down screens. And then you get and granular with a flicker of legibility that dissipates before it can be interpolated into any succession of imagery. And you see the words that he uses, specific vocabulary that kind of rhymes, kind of sounds similar. And then in the last verse, he says, molecules that accumulate in drifts too soon, strewn, so sound-alikes there, with sand hewn into browning mounds by plow blade, left to turn to slush. So it kind of has a weird, unusual rhythm based on the words that he's using. And I've encountered this with many of his poems. I had to keep searching for more because it's just so fascinating how he writes. It sounds scientific, yes, but it's also rhythmic in a way. In a way that you don't really see with a lot of modern poets, again, because it's much more free and flowing, which isn't a bad thing. But here you get a different kind of feel, which I enjoy. It makes reading each one of his poems a blast, and I do hope I can find more of his poetry out there, as I'm sure it does. He tries different things. He's experimenting, and he's willing to take a risk, because this could definitely blow up on him and make his poetry inaccessible to a lot of people. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Snowfall by Ravi Shankar, a pretty amazing poem that I'm definitely going to recommend that you go out and read. Definitely a fun way to start Poetry Thursday in 2023 with a fun poem that is exciting to read. Again, I will put a link to it in the description so that you can find it, read it. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below, or just simply comment on something I've said in this review here. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or possibly join the Discord so that more people can find out about this channel or Poetry Thursday or this poem or this author if they don't already know. Or you can just simply contribute to the conversation on Discord as well. And I'll put a link to that in the comments as well. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and snowy travels. Farewell.